top, and sort of on top of the ocean. But under the ocean, we know that healthy, functioning, living oceans are better able to provide resilience to the planet for climate change. And a series of scientific analysis have estimated that at least 30% of ecosystems, especially oceans, need to be protected and functioning, to stay above this kind of, tipping point of the Earth. So this is where this 30% number has come from. Sort of this idea of 30 by 30, that the world that countries need to come together and protect 30% of their lands and oceans by 2030 in order to avert the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis, which is all great. That's a great vision, and I'm 100% absolutely in support of this. But there's some problems with that. One is the question should not just be, thinking about setting aside 30%, right, and just like fencing it off, and especially around the ocean. You can't fence off the ocean. And the other way people think about it is, well, if I fence off, if I X out 30% of my territory, that's 30% of revenues that I'm losing, from fisheries, from other kinds of, development opportunities. And the blue economy is not how to extract from the ocean. It's the sustainable economy should be how do we live better with the ocean and build economies in a way that does not degrade nature. So the question should be, how do we get a return on investment from protecting the planet? Not thinking about the ocean and the blue economy as something we extract from, but something we need to invest in. And by investing in that, we get real returns, both in natural capital and actual physical, like real capital in money, in economies. And do that at a scale that matters. So this map shows, we've made some significant progress around the world in marine protection. 20 years ago, this map would have been just completely absent. Even the idea of marine protected areas is quite new. And all over the world, there's millions of square kilometers of marine protected areas that countries, that states have stood up, ranging from in the Pacific. Is this a pointer? Oh yeah. So in the Pacific, there's places like the Laos Seascape in Fiji. There's places like the Palau National Marine Sanctuary, to places you probably never heard of, like off the coast of Africa. There's the Tristan da Cunha Marine Protected Area, one of the largest ever. In Indonesia, which I'll talk about today, there's an entire strategy around marine protection. So this has really been a fantastic progress, towards protection. But most of the focus has been on designation, not how do we pay for protection, and not how do we get oceans and protections to pay for itself. And this is why, despite the obvious, clear truth that we all depend on the ocean, of all the SDGs, oceans are the least funded. The SDG 14, Life Underwater, is the most underfunded SDG. It's something like less than 4% of the need. It's really pathetic. But part of it is there's no mechanisms to really do that, because that money has to come from somewhere. In many ways, it's tragedy of the commons at this global scale. Most of the ocean belongs to no one. So everyone just thinks of it as something to take from, and we know what happens there. So how do we really exert this ownership, at the deepest level, and really get a return from protection, and see some marine protected areas in. This pointer's beyond me. In this part of the world that we're talking about, the Bay of Bengal, the Indian Ocean. So, as we heard yesterday, the fate of the world, especially the ocean, the fate of nature, especially the ocean, really is the fate of the world. We also heard very eloquently, very convincingly, that the fate of the Indian Ocean, and especially the Bengal Bay of Bengal seem to be right at the forefront of this future. That's one takeaway I took away, especially from the morning. But despite that importance, that recognized importance from very practical people, from military people, from people who think about geopolitics, there's not like a clear pathway to get to financing at scale. We can't keep under 1.5 degrees of warming without nature. We need to fund the oceans to do that. But what do we do? And that's the next part of my talk, is exactly what we can do. There are models out there. And this is where I think Sri Lanka can lead. So I hope we can collectively think about taking action on this today. I'd love for us all to be part of a big effort that starts right here. The Colombo Declaration for new marine protected areas for Sri Lanka, and financing them. So what I would like to really see is a vision to finance Sri Lanka's oceans, just like you'd finance infrastructure. That's a much more understandable way to think about financing. It's like if you're going to go build roads or bridges or dams, you finance it up front because that's an investment. Your country, your state, your communities will get a return on that over a long period of time. Just like, we need to really think about financing oceans as infrastructure to help reboot the economy. And, Sri Lanka really needs this. And every country up here on this map that's designated marine protected areas need this kind of support. But this is where Sri Lanka, I believe, you can lead here. Because at its heart, this is what this whole conference is about. It's about security. It's not about like this side business of protecting biodiversity for its beauty and because we love it, because we are scuba divers, or because we go out and look at birds, and it's just like people like me are rare that just go out and do this sort of just as a hobby. But it's no longer a hobby. It's something that the entire Earth depends on. Well-managed, sustainable oceans secure communities, they secure countries, they secure economies, and most importantly, they provide food security and an economic safety net for communities, the country, and the planet. So does that sound too good to be true? You probably want to know how I'm thinking about this now. So this is this transition into I'll talk about Blue Halo in Indonesia. So Blue Halo. We launched this giant project at the Indonesia G20 in Bali in November 2022. And we've got a pilot project approved by the Green Climate Fund, the GCF, that's in final stages. Usually, for those of you who do GCF projects, they're painful. They're the most bureaucratic agency on earth, and that's saying a lot from those of you who work in agencies. Typically it takes 3 to 5 years to get a concept note, and then another several years to get a proposal through, and their proposals are like PhD theses, painful. But we did this in 9 months leading up to the G20 because Indonesia really saw this as an imperative. They really wanted to see this happen and be announced, and the proposal's almost done. And the pilot area is this fishery management area 572 on the Indian Ocean. And here's a map of it. It's a small area of 1 million square kilometers, 100 million acres. To give you some sense of scale, the state of California, is half of that size. The Sri Lankan EEZ is half of that size. So it's a big area. It's one of Indonesia's fishery management areas. And the reason that the Indonesian government allocated that to this project is because the fisheries are declining, they're generally overfished, and the communities have very little access to capital and very little access to opportunities for new livelihoods. Interesting area, the continental shelf is very close by the shore, so much of the big commercial fisheries and the community fisheries are fairly near shore and somewhat more manageable and able to be monitored. The other interesting part about this is that it's the Indian Ocean, right? Most of our work in Asia Pacific has been more in the Pacific. So, and this is an area that the science was very like less understood, and just sort of a blank slate for figuring out what to do next. So land of opportunity. So what did we do? So how does this work? Well, the first part, this is important, is that the enabling conditions are there in Indonesia. Indonesia as a country, made real investment into recognition of their natural capital and the assets of natural capital that could drive the blue economy. They're second largest in global ranking in seaweed production. Seaweed's emerging as like one of these potentially new global commodities. It's used in lots of stuff, from cosmetics to food. So Indonesia's second only to China. And their fisheries and aquaculture sector is $27 billion. But the real reason Indonesia embarked on this was because of fear. Warren Buffett says, people invest because of fear or greed. Almost every fishery on Earth has collapsed from overexploitation. And some have rebounded, some have not. Indonesia's fishery on the west coast of Sumatra is definitely overexploited. Was not well managed. There's no data there. If that fishery collapses, people will starve. Something like 80% of protein in Indonesia comes from its domestic fishery. So improving the management of that fishery was an imperative for security. It's why we're here, security, food security for people. Indonesia also recognized part of that food security is based on these ecological, assets like coral reefs, like seagrasses. I think today is like Global Seagrass Day. Mangroves. These are ecosystem types that drive these fisheries and drive the health of the oceans. So Indonesia already had national blue and green development plans around building up economies around oceans and natural capital. So we couldn't have done this. We didn't start from scratch. We really built on what Indonesia had done, both this high-level recognition of the importance, but also some specific plans that were put into place. And the next part is really interesting. If you take away anything, it's that these virtuous cycles are possible. So this slide, we spent a little bit of time focusing on it. At the center is these ecosystems. This is not working now. So the center here is the blue. Mangroves, seagrasses, coral reefs. These are the key habitats that support biodiversity, especially fisheries. And on the hang on, my eyes are bad. I'll look at my own slide. And the halo part, this area of production, and the idea is we'd use science in the blue areas to really identify and formally protect 30% of this EEZ, in new marine protected areas. And there's good science on how to cite, how to identify and prioritize the places where marine protection goes. The halo is production areas, that spill over fish from protection. But they also, protection also does, like, if you will, spills over other things like tourism opportunities to develop carbon assets, especially blue carbon. Mangroves, are one of the densest carbon ecosystems on Earth, and if developed into projects can return carbon credits, which can be sold on the market, and that's a real economy. And there's also seagrasses, which are an undercapitalized, under-recognized, blue carbon asset, which, the science is just developing now. So in some ways, the protection can be thought of as spilling over, natural capital that can then be developed. Some of it like actual fish. Like, you think about it, it makes sense. You protect, especially spawning and nursery habitats, you're going to have more fish. But you also need to be able to manage those fish that are being caught. So part of it is you have to have systems to measure and make sure that your quotas are within the boundaries that are defined by ecology. but there just hasn't been capacity or will or data to do that. And part of this is driving, financing to create these systems in order to be sustainable. So you have to do protection, you have to have the science part of it to understand the systems, and then you have to have the policy to put that into place. And then, your fishery should grow. You manage it well, you're going to have more fish, the economy grows, your fishery grows, there's new enterprise development, there's new livelihood development, of all sorts. This is the idea that it's a virtuous cycle, that you build the economy based on nature, nature gets better because of the economy. And the most important part of this is the gray circle is a blended finance facility. So we need to think about investing in the whole thing up front so that we can go from this vicious cycle where nature is degraded and everybody makes less and less money every year to where nature is protected and the economy grows and protection also grows. So the rest of the talk will focus on the blended finance part of this because, you talk about the nature part and you only talk to people like me. You talk about the financing part and then suddenly, people are interested. Okay. So the next part here, but this is real money we're talking about. And sorry the fonts are small in this. I think, we can share this deck. But what this slide shows is that setup costs for marine protected areas, at the scale we're talking about, say, existing marine protected areas and the gap, towards, the entire network. That's the bar graphs on the left, and the middle sort of shows setup costs for that gap in millions of US dollars. And it's significant. So we're looking at, for all of Indonesia, a setup cost of around 500 million for, to reach 30%. It's not small money. We're not talking about going and doing a bake sale or doing a gala to raise $500 million. This is like balance sheet capital. But then, there's not just setup costs, but there's annual management costs for protected areas. And these are estimated around another $500 million a year for annual costs. Protection and managing protection costs real money. You look at the U.S. government budget for, the U.S. Forest Service or for NOAA or, any of the developed countries. And, these are significant budgets. I think U.S. Forest Service budget is like $8 billion a year, for public lands in the U.S. NOAA is similar in scale. So, there's real cost to this. And we have to be thinking both at the scale of what it would take to designate protection at these massive scales, but how do we finance it? So we did some analysis about what it would take, within the scale. And we worked with the Green Climate Fund for this area, looking at standing up 30% protection and then investing in the blue economy to make it this virtuous cycle. So we came up with two parts. Oops, I flipped my own slide. So financing Blue Halo. There's two parts of this that's supported by the Green Climate Fund. One is a grant-based facility. Really starting from scratch, we have to stand up things like marine protected area management authorities. We have to start investing in small and medium, small, and micro blue economy enterprises. Because for Indonesia, these communities that live on the coast are the key. Right? These are poor, vulnerable communities that have very little access to livelihoods. So immediately investing in some places, and demonstrating success is a way to go forward. We also have to stand up some of the research and get the science going that underlies management. And then also equally important, we have to think about an investment pipeline. Any of you in the private sector who have worked in the private sector know to issue debt on the capital markets, to have a successful bond, investors will look specifically at your pipeline and say, are these projects that the bond is supporting, are they viable, are they going to return, what's the risk? This is why, These buildings like, these businesses like McKinsey and Goldman Sachs have giant buildings full of analysts looking at these problems. So it's a key thing. What's the investment pipeline? Because side by side with the grant facility, and the grant facility is not small. I think in our latest proposal, it's around $50 million. Side by side, we would like to issue some sort of investment vehicle like a blue bond, potentially a sovereign blue bond issued on Indonesia's balance sheet, based on investing in oceans as infrastructure. Now Indonesia does that and it puts it out in the market. It's probably not going to be the highest rated bond. But the cool thing about this is the investment pipeline that's driven by that bond also aligns with the Green Climate Fund's metrics, what they're trying to do with this sort of multilateral money, their metrics of success. So the other thing that the Green Climate Fund will do, they'll do a credit enhancement, a guarantee of that bond to improve its investability. So that when that gets issued, it will be the highest rated, AAA rated. So the investors will get return, but the Green Climate Fund gets its outcomes. So it's in many ways it's a form of results-based payments or de-risking of investment. But the important thing is these two things go together. Usually we just do grant funding. NGO like CI, we're grant funded. That's our bread and butter. We get grants, we go deploy, we do activities, we do interventions, we get outcomes. But in this one, part of the intervention is we're developing the blue bond. Because investors, they tend to go out and invest in stuff that will get return. Usually those things degrade nature. But the whole point of this is the grant part, the grant piece, will identify areas that support nature. And that's what the blue bond will invest in. So these two things are linked. And that's the real innovation here, is the investments linked with the grant piece. So the investment will unlock these new and enhanced benefit streams and provide both financial and ecosystem returns from protected areas, from fisheries, from blue carbon, from ecotourism. And to give you an example, like if you think about fisheries, we go to one of the communities on the coast called Nias. We would go and visit there. The fishers will go out and they're in small boats. They'll spend like a week or so out. They'll fill their boats. They'll come back and they'll sell the fish to the communities. What they don't sell and eat immediately, they try to salt and save, but basically there's a huge amount of waste because they have no cold storage. And they also have no access to regional or global markets to sell that fish. So part of the investment is developing that supply chain of sustainably caught fish to buyers, and being able to make sure that there's quality, from cold storage and from handling and processing. It could be anywhere from developing processing facilities to cold storage to landing facilities. Developing blue carbon, developing ecotourism. There's great surfing there. It's like an unknown, high-end surfing spot. There's millions of surfers around the world that go and do tourism. But surfers tend to go places they've heard of, like places like Bali, and where there's facilities. They go and you stay in a hotel in Bali and you go surfing. There's nothing in Nias. So the blue bond will invest in that infrastructure that will eventually return, and that return some part of it will go back to nature. I think the other interesting thing is part of this, back to this schematic, this very simplified schematic, is part of the returns from fisheries. As fisheries grow, these sustainable fisheries are implemented. There's non-tax revenue specifically from fisheries and tourism and from these sort of state-regulated activities that will go back to this grant facility and replenish it. So there's financial schemes around both the grant facility and returns for investors for the blue bond. Okay, so that's Blue Halo. Sort of a dense amount of information about really a new way to think about financing protection. But this is not the only way to finance it. We just chose to go down this route of sovereign bond and grant facility with the Green Climate Fund and so forth. But there's other ways to finance oceans, and this is something where I think Sri Lanka should really consider. And one is called a debt for nature swap. So there was recently the largest debt for nature swap ever initiated in Ecuador for the Galapagos Islands. This is not a CI project. This was led by Pew and others, the Pew Foundation and others. But it's a great case study. And it's a simple concept, and that is sovereign debt can be purchased on the secondary market at a discount. And in this case, Ecuador's debt, it was analyzed, and $1.6 billion of Ecuador's sovereign debt was purchased for a discounted rate of like $650 million and restructured. So the government of Ecuador gets better terms, but they also commit to investing some of that delta back into nature. So in this example, the government of Ecuador committed to investing $450 million of that payback over the next 20 years back into the Galapagos, to do exactly the kind of things I was just talking about, to manage this marine protected area and expand it, and invest some of that return, some of that difference into marine protection. And interestingly here, they also de-risked. In this case, they used the U.S. government, the Development Finance Corporation, which issued political risk insurance, essentially guaranteeing that investment. That's formerly the OPEC, the overseas insurance company, led by the U.S. government. So tremendous potential here to think about debt restructuring in order to finance marine protection. And I think further in the way Ecuador structured this, they committed that 450. Some part of that is sustainable financing to to like $12 million in the annual conservation funding in perpetuity, that's already been rolling. In Ecuador, they get better payment terms. It's like they owed 1.6 billion, and now they only owe 600. And part of that, they are reinvesting back into their own economy. So this is another example of this win-win-win kind of approach, creating these virtuous cycles, based on thinking about protection at scale, and financing at scale. So I'll leave you here with this map. This is the EEZs of the world. And as you can see, Sri Lanka is right there. It's significant, a big EEZ, 500,000 square kilometers. But much of this is blue water, this so-called high seas. Much of the Earth is sort of this ungoverned, unregulated area of high seas that require the exact cooperation that we've been talking about in this last couple days. So, I'm delighted to be here. Delighted to have this conversation of how oceans and investment in oceans and conservation can drive security, especially food security for people and communities and countries. And would be honored and eager to work with Sri Lanka on thinking about large-scale marine protection and more important financing large-scale marine protection. So, thank you very much.
Dr. Richard Chow, Senior Vice President and Chief Field Officer, Asia Pacific Field Division, Conservation International, Virginia, USA. So if I add something to that, Richard, we are on the same process at the moment because now we are developing our marine spatial planning. So I propose Pathfinder Foundation to connect Richard with Climate Change Secretariat of the Presidential Secretariat. So we can get a lot from you because we use bellies as the example in those the nature to dead SOP program. So we discussed with some Seychelles and Mauritius marine scientists to initiate Sri Lanka's marine spatial planning. For that, we developed Sri Lanka's roadmap for marine spatial planning that will be launched in 2 months' time. So I think there's a very good initiative you have taken. Kindly, I request again Pathfinder Foundation to have with Richard, and we can learn more and we can do more to Sri Lanka's economy, especially to get out of this crisis situation. So our next panelist is Dr. Ataullah Rashid. He's a doctorate researcher from Australia National University, ANU. So Dr. Ataullah he was former diplomat from Maldives, and at present he is an academic researcher of Australian National University, ANU, and he holds a PhD in political science and international relations at Maldives National University, and he's the author of peer-reviewed policy publication on small states' impacts on global and regional security agenda. It was published in 2023, and he has a second PhD also on climate security in SIDS, Small Island Developing Nations, and their engagement in UN Security Council debates. One of the, how our small nations, small developing nations and small islands, large islands, how we can raise our voice in UN system. So he is again an academician. Today he will talk about climate change, maritime disasters, and blue-green economy from that angle. The floor is for you, Dr. Richard, Dr. Ataullah.
Thank you, Professor Kumara, and thank you, everyone. And if you can hear me clearly, I will continue.
We can hear you.
And okay, great. Thank you very much. And I'll first start by saying a fantastic presentation, Dr. Richard Gio, and it was I think a great project which could be implemented and adapted in different parts of the world, including the Indian Ocean area that we are focusing on today. I think I also agree with something Dr. Gio highlighted about the nexus of security, defense, and the ocean, and the other issues that are connected to the ocean, like climate change and maritime resources and management of resources. So my presentation today, if I can, I'll try to share with you.
Switch to presentation mode, please.
Can you see what I'm sharing?
Yes, you can see, but switch into presentation mode, please. Then we can see the full screen.
Just give me a second. Is it working?
Oh, not yet, sir.
How about now?
Not. No. You use the same. You go. Maximize your screen and you can proceed, please.
How about now?
That would work. Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, this will work, right? My apologies for that. So what I'm presenting today will be a slightly different approach to the previous one, but it's more focused on security aspects of the ocean. And my data that's going to be presented here, it's going to be a short presentation, but what I'm presenting is part of a bigger research. So this is focused on Maldives maritime security component that focuses on maritime security capacity in terms of the implications of climate change on the maritime security in Maldives. But taking a climate change aspect, I think it's also important to note that Maldives, like Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and other small island states, experience climate change as one of the main and the bigger challenges that we face every day, and also that affects our capability in terms of development, economic progress, and also social well-being. So one of the main factors that actually make Maldives important in terms of regional security is its location. So Maldives is located in the Indian Ocean, but because it's located in the Indian Ocean and where it is placed in central south center of Indian Ocean, there are important economic and also other activities that passes through the Maldives, like international shipping lanes and also the major sea lanes of communication that makes that its geopolitical and geostrategic location important. That's why Maldives is also part of the important spotlights of geopolitical debate today. Looking at climate change is an everyday threat to Maldives. But climate change also has an important link to the ocean. Maldives is, in terms of small island category, positioned around the ocean, where about 99 or 98% of its territory is the ocean. So healthy ocean, whatever happens in the ocean is important for the economic development as well as social progress, as well as the political situation in the Maldives. But when climate change interacts with the ocean, so many other things happens, where we all heard about climate change being a threat multiplier. This means that whatever happens in terms of resources, in terms of what human do in the ocean, the activities that we conduct and undertake in the ocean is affected by climate change. So in terms of security, then there's no way that the Maldives can establish a single meaning of security, even in the context of maritime security. So it's a mix of so many other things that affects the Maldives itself, capacity to progress, develop, and also maintain its sustainability and territorial integrity and sovereignty. So climate change has been incorporated into its policy narrative in both security and non-security sectors. But focusing on what's happening in the ocean and how climate security affects the capacity of Maldives to progress or maintain its position, I focus on few issues today, that is maritime disasters and pollution. One example I could give about the capacity and how capacity is affected is how the Coast Guard Maldives Coast Guard could and also has been managing maritime disasters during the time of bad weather or any incident that happens in the Maldives. So this slide actually gives a snapshot of what actually could happen or has happened during an hour of a good bad weather day. So within an hour, there were multiple reports happening around different parts of Maldives asking for help, and the way in which the Coast Guard could and also have navigated will depend on its capacity to understand the impact of climate change in multiple ways. And the research and our policy thinking and also engagements could be extended and expanded in this area. And I think there's been ongoing work happening between small states in the Indian Ocean as well as across ocean-based small states about how to incorporate climate into the security debate or the security discourse that's not only traditional. The second issue I would want to focus is Of course, when we have time, I would be happy to discuss more on these areas, but to be conscious of time and also give more opportunity for further questions, I'm just going to be summarizing most of the research data here. The second thing I'm going to be talking about is pollution related to climate change in the ocean connected to the Maldives territory. So Maldives sits in a vast ocean area that actually has so many things traversing in the Maldivian EEZ and also connected territories. So pollution is one of the potential threats the Maldives faces today. The biggest threats the country could face if it happens in large scale. So pollution happens in two ways. There is, or could happen in two ways. That is human errors and one connected to extreme weather conditions. So extreme weather conditions is connected to more directly connected to what happens in climate change debate. But also human errors, again, will be connected to climate change because climate change issues and its challenges crosses over multiple areas. Like again, going back to the initial capacity of a Coast Guard to undertake its operations during a bad weather event. So in terms of human errors, we could consider what's happening around Maldives in the ocean area. Like, for example, what I've highlighted here is like 40 million barrels of oil passes through the bigger region. Means that if something happens and if it occurs within the Maldives region, it's going to have a devastating impact on the economic and also social life in Maldives. Maldives is a tourism dependent and as well as tourism based driven economy, which actually focuses on creating a better environment for tourists as well as whoever engages on the development process. This is apart from the government's effort to create a better environment for everybody and locals as well as everybody else living in the Maldives. So if an event happens like this, it's going to be having a lot of costs as well as a long-term pollution incidents. And then that creates more reason for the policymakers to think about climate change or other things that actually affects the ocean, including pollution. In terms of climate change or bad weather, as considering as an ongoing issue, Maldives also looks into or have an eye on what's happening around the world and closer to the region. Whatever incidents happens around and closer to the region in the ocean has been coordinated and well organized, managed by the local authorities in coordination with regional authorities. So one of the ways to address these issues is looking at national, bilateral, as well as regional capabilities that we have. So if an incident happened locally, if it's in small scale, Maldives would be able to manage it using the local resources. But since, again, it's happening in the ocean that's connected to many other oceans, there's also a need for bilateral and regional cooperation. So regional cooperation is one of the important and also strengths that actually adds value to the existing capacity in the Maldives. And there are regional organizations that actually helps us to further build the narrative and also the capacity for the Maldives to further negotiate and also get involved in the regional security question concerning what happens in small island territory. So I will stop there with that slide, and I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
That's Dr. Thawla Rashid, Director, Doctoral Researcher, Australia National University, and he's from Maldives. He spoke about climate change impacts on ocean resources, and again how to work in regional collaborations, especially linking Maldives as an example. Thank you, Dr. Rashid. And then our next panelist is Professor Rashid Uzzaman. He's from Department of International Relations, University of Dhaka, Bangladesh. So Dr. Rashid is a academician again from Department of International Relations, University of Dhaka since 1998. He holds a bachelor and master's degree in international relations from University of Dhaka, and he has a master's in security studies in University of Hull. At the same time, he's holding a PhD on strategic studies in University of Reading, United Kingdom. And from 2009 to 2011, he got selected for Alexander von Humboldt Scholarship. I know it's a very, very prestigious scholarship from Germany. And he worked under this scholarship in University of Erfurt in Germany. And he's a Fulbright visiting professor to the Department of Political Sciences, Vanderbilt University, USA in 2012. And he's a very well-known public speaker and very in regional and national and global forums, including Defense Service Command and Staff College, and again National Defense College in Bangladesh, and Tribhuvan University Nepal, National Defense College in Sri Lanka, Foreign Services Academy, and Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Police Staff College, Bangladesh, and Public Administration Training Center, Bangladesh, and Bangladesh Institute of Governance and Management, BGIM, again Bangladesh. So with that experience, I really request Dr. Rashid to share your experience on climate change, maritime disaster management, and blue-green economy in Indian Ocean perspective. The floor is for you, Dr. Rashid.
Thank you very much, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
For it's a wonderful introduction. I would like to thank the Pathfinder Foundation for inviting me. We worked with the Pathfinder Foundation last year as part of a RUSI project, and it's again great to see some of the familiar faces. I'm particularly pleased to see Shiv Shankar Menon, sir. I met him once at New Delhi and I'm using his book, Choices Inside the Making, when I teach my students comparative foreign policy. So thank you very much. And what I'll do is I have a PowerPoint presentation, which I will share. It is somewhat building up on what the first speaker has discussed, looking at the whole issue of a blue economy. What are the challenges a country like Bangladesh faces, particularly with regard to blue economy? Certain concepts have come up. The whole question of blue carbon ecosystems, for example, blue justice, blue equity, blue funds, particularly, we have been talking about that, and blue governance. So what I'll try to do is I'll try to bring all of these together and discuss Bangladesh as a case study. So if you just allow me a second, I'm not technically very agile, so I may mess up. And I also have a bad cold, so please bear with me. So can everyone see this?
Not yet, sir. Yes.
So can you?
Yes, kindly.
So you're able to see this, right? Okay. Is this all right?
Yes, you can move, please.
Okay, so as I said, I mean, the topic on which I'll be speaking today is blue economy, climate change, and disaster management, Bangladesh perspectives. So this is what the blue economy potential of various Indian Ocean littoral countries look like. And Bangladesh, which is about, particularly after the peaceful, and I emphasize on this, peaceful arbitration with our neighboring countries, Bangladesh has been able to acquire a maritime territory, which is about 118,000 plus square kilometer, with a continental shelf, which is approximately 37,000 square kilometer with depths of about 50 meter. So this is what it looks like. So Bangladesh, historically, Bangladesh's foreign policy has been always oriented towards our neighboring country, particularly India, which looms large. So in the 1990s and early 2000, when we were students at the University of Dhaka, foreign policy usually meant an omnidirectional foreign policy, focusing only on Bangladesh's relations with India. But particularly after, as I government of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina coming to power, and with the government taking up the issue of this delimitation of our maritime boundaries, as you can see, this is what it looks like. So, as I said, after the peaceful arbitration, Bangladesh has got internal waters, territorial sea, contiguous zone, and exclusive economic zone. And of course, we share it with India and Myanmar. Historically, when we talk about Bangladesh and the Bay of Bengal, as I pointed out earlier, the problem has always been that we have been inward looking, maybe because it is because of our colonial legacy when the Indian Ocean turned into a British lake, and we seldom talked about it. But this is about to change. And again, historically, if you look at the Bengali culture, we have been ocean going, Tamralipti, which was a port in ancient Bengal, an ocean-going port really, which connected Bengal with Southeast Asia. And as I also always argue in any forum, when we need to talk about the Bay of Bengal, we also need to take the Andaman Seas into consideration, because whatever happens in the Andaman Sea, it also has implications for Bangladesh in the Bay of Bengal region. So when we talk about the blue economic potential, I'm sure all of you have gone through this. I will not bore you with the details. Marine, coastal tourism, fishing, aquaculture, marine renewable energy, biotechnology, marine manufacturing, marine construction, marine commerce. As already we have discussed, as the first speaker pointed out, we also need to take blue carbon ecosystems into consideration, which have tremendous importance in the days ahead. And Bangladesh is one of the countries which is blessed with a mango grove forest, the Sundarbans, which we share with India. Bangladesh has about 60% of the Sundarbans, which is a mango grove forest falling within the Bangladeshi side of the border. So again, this is a great asset for us, and Bangladesh needs to take it into consideration as it deals with the multiple challenges of salinity, climate change, and other environmental issues. So what are as I have already pointed out, that we have tremendous blue economic potential. But as unfortunately, as it is often said, that in international relations, one may have a great potential, and it will always remain like that, as De Gaulle pointed out about Brazil. So in case of Bangladesh, there is also a question that even though we talk about blue economy a lot, will Bangladesh really be able to translate this blue economy into a tangible asset, which will not only bring economic prosperity, but also will, again, as the first speaker pointed out, it's a question which ultimately relates to our whole existence as a human species. And oceans are at the forefront of the climate changes or climate catastrophes, as I tend to argue these days. They're at the forefront, and these are somewhat the problems which we see taking place at the oceans are sort of a harbinger of the challenges human existence will face in the days ahead. So in case of Bangladesh, the challenges are maritime domain awareness and effective interagency collaboration. A lot of agencies are involved with blue economy projects. You have the Ministry of Energy and Resources, you have the Bangladesh Navy, you have the Bangladesh Coast Guard, various shipping corporations of the government and also the private sector, Ministry of Fisheries, Ministry of Disaster Management, Home Ministry, for example. So there's always the issue of interagency collaboration And we know often how difficult that is, particularly when one works in a government framework and also on a private public partnership. Effective policy framework with regard to ocean governance. We have been working on this. The Bangladesh government has published quite a few very important documents, including the Bangladesh Delta Plan, which highlights the importance of the Bay of Bengal and talks about Bangladesh utilizing this particular asset. But again, as I said, it requires funds, which is something very, very important. So we talked about blue funds, which came up. The question of governance also is something very, very important. Even as I speak to you, ladies and gentlemen, the Bangladesh government has announced a 2-month fishing ban, which the whole idea is to ensure that hilsa fish particularly, they are allowed to breed, so we are able to resuscitate our depleted fisheries resources. But the problem is that you have the fishermen who are out of work for about 2 months. So who gives them adequate sustenance? Who gives them the necessary money and other resources so that they can ensure that they and their family do not starve over the next 2 months? This is just to highlight one important issue when we talk about the issue of governance. So it's not only a question of ocean governance, but blue governance, which needs to bring various stakeholders together and work towards making a sustainable policy. Mitigating security threat to explore marine resources to the fullest extent, mismanagement and destructive fishing activities, regulation and sustainable management. Again, with climate change and fishing stocks being depleted in various parts of the world, we may see shipping, fishing fleets from different parts of the world entering into the Bay of Bengal and of course, creating havoc. So again, this is an issue which we need to remember, need to take into consideration. Pollution in the Bay of Bengal, ladies and gentlemen, again, a big issue. This is something which one sees in Bangladesh on a regular basis. Rivers, this is the world's largest active delta, ladies and gentlemen, and let me remind you about this. So you have the 3 gigantic rivers, the Ganga, when it enters into Bangladesh is called the Padma. You have the Brahmaputra, which once it enters into Bangladesh is called the Jamuna, and the Meghna. All these are transboundary rivers. They all come together. They flow through Bangladesh into the Bay of Bengal. So this is the world's largest active delta. But in different parts of the country, we are seeing pollution as a result of, particularly plastic pollution, as a result of which our rivers are often becoming very difficult to navigate. If you look at the port like Chittagong port, for example, which is somewhat inside the Kornofuli Channel, regular dredging needs to take place, and most of the time the things which come up are plastic waste. So this is again a reality for Bangladesh. Fishes particularly have been affected by microplastics. They have been found in fishes. So and this is going to increase, unfortunately, in the days ahead. So this is something again which we need to take into consideration. And as I always argue, ladies and gentlemen, please remember, oceans are one. We may divide them geographically. We have this cartographic idea about oceans, Indian Ocean, Pacific Ocean, but what happens in one part of the ocean has impact on other parts of the water bodies all over the world. These are not like boundaries which sovereign states have created. So whatever happens in country X does not affect country Y. Unfortunately, or fortunately, oceans they do not operate along in this Westphalian concept of jurisdiction. So what happens in one ocean, we need to take that into consideration. And that is why I argue that when things about the Bay of Bengal, we also need to look at the whole Indian Ocean, and particularly Bangladesh also needs to look at what is taking place in the Andaman Seas. I will come to that in a moment. So this is, ladies and gentlemen, the coastal zone of Bangladesh. You have 19 districts in one of the most densely populated countries in the world. This is 32% of Bangladesh's land area, about 35 million. And I'm sure the number has increased by now because I got this data from a publication which came out about a year ago. So by now this has increased. You have about 29% of the country's population, according to the official estimate. Again, something which we are dealing with often on a regular basis, increased frequency of storms, tropical cyclones. So number of cyclones formed between 1972 and 2015 have been about 144. And as you can see, because of the concave nature of Bangladesh's coastline, often the cyclones, they tend to move, and once they pass over Bangladesh, that can have tremendous consequences. Oceans and cyclones, they are connected. But we must also remember the political implications of this. Disaster politics is something which is very, very important in today's political science. Look at Hurricane Katrina, and you will immediately understand the implications of a natural disaster, and how it affects the politics of a country. The same also, if you're a student of history, you will know this. In 1971, Bangladesh became independent through a war. But before that, elections took place in December 1970, and it was the whole issue of giving, not handing over power to the legitimate authority, to the elected representatives of the people, which led to the 1971 war. But again, something which we tend to forget is that in November 1970, a devastating cyclone raped over what was then East Pakistan, and the apathy of the central government, that is the government of Pakistan, towards this particular disaster, which led to about 500,000 people dead, that also had an implication, that also had an effect in the 1970 elections. So again, the issue of disaster politics is something which politicians are aware of in Bangladesh. And I will again talk about this in a moment when we talk about resilience and disaster management in Bangladesh. So as you can see, the intensity of storms, these are projected to increase in the days ahead. So we may have super cyclones again, and how we deal with it. This is something which we need to seriously ponder with the passage of time. Again, an important issue which all of us are familiar with, the rate of temperature increase in coastal Bangladesh. So as you can see, these are the coastal areas: Satkhira, Khulna, Borishal, Mongla, which is a port, Chittagong, which is a port. We also have a port coming up over here. And of course, we have a big Japanese investment in Maheshkhali, which is a deep sea port in this part of the world, which ultimately, as the government thinks, will have an implication also for Northeast India. So road and railway communication, connectivity, that is the buzzword in Bangladesh right now, and rightly so. And as I always argue, that it was not the Bangladeshi or the Indian policy planners who had thought about this connectivity, but of course, an arch imperialist like Lord Curzon, who first talked about connectivity using Bengal into Northeast India, into Myanmar, and all the way into China. So this is something which we need to consider. So for Bangladesh, the reality is things are heating up, and it is not a pun, but I'm serious about this. Bangladesh may experience temperature rise. We often talk about global warming and sea level rise in Bangladesh. But if you see the recent reports, you will notice that one of the big threats which is emerging as far as climate crisis is concerned is that large parts of Bangladesh may be subject to extreme heat waves, and that may make things very, very difficult. And we have already experienced this in the past 2-3 years. Temperature has gone up, particularly during the months of April, May, and that this is something which we have seldom seen in Bangladesh. I did not see this when I was growing up in this country. So climate change, climate crisis is here, and it is announcing itself in a big way. So what are the sorry, ladies and gentlemen, I have a bad cold. The impact. What is the impact of the climate-induced events? One is, of course, we have increasing salinity in the Bay of Bengal. As you can see, I pointed out to you, we have the three. This is the delta, the Bengal Delta. We have the three gigantic rivers. This is the Ganges, Padma, This is the Brahmaputra, Jamuna, and this is, of course, the Meghna. All of them, they flow together into the Bay of Bengal. With the Himalayan glaciers melting, with water scarcity being faced by the upstream countries, and this doesn't only include Nepal and India, but also China. So Bangladesh is facing increasing water scarcity. As a result of this, what is happening is that over the last 4 decades, salinity has increased big time in Bangladesh. So with sea level rise, we are looking at large parts of the country becoming inundated. But even if that does not happen, we are facing an immediate crisis, which is, of course, salinity intrusion. So you can see, particularly in the south western part of the country, which is near, of course, this is where Sundarban is located. This is Sundarban. This is Bangladesh-India border. This is on the other side, you have India, Sundarban, you have Kolkata over here. So as you can see, increased salinity in the south western part of the country, particularly, and also in the central coastal areas. This is increasing again at an alarming rate. In fact, it is said these days that if you go and visit the coastal areas of Bangladesh, and if you are an honorable guest over there, the host can offer you a glass of clean drinking water, and that is the ultimate hospitality, because clean drinking water has become extremely scarce. And this has again led to health problems. And again, as I was reading today's papers, salinity, climate, river erosion, climate-induced changes, these also has other implications, including, very interestingly, a rise in child marriages, particularly girl-children marriages in this part of the country. Why? Often because homesteads are becoming unlivable. People tend to move and new areas. One of the first things they try to do is try to ensure that their girl children or female children are safely sent off somewhere. Marriage often is seen as an interesting option. So just to highlight that even though we are talking about climate change, the blue economy, oceans, but it has implications in a myriad of ways as far as the Bangladeshi people are concerned, particularly in the coastal areas. So, as I said, salinity intrusion, this has become a big problem, affecting not only access to clean drinking water, but also leading to loss of farmland. And of course, with rising population, food security is again always an important issue. I've already highlighted this. We talked about marine pollution. Huge number of rivers. It's a delta, as you can see, hundreds and hundreds of rivers. But of course, a lot of these rivers have now silted up. They're drying up. Pollution is creating havoc. And as I pointed out to you, in Chittagong, in the coastal areas, and the riverine ports, marine pollution is something which you often experience on a regular basis. If you travel on the rivers of Bangladesh, industrial waste, plastic have turned these rivers into, for the choice of a better word, I would say cesspool. So this is again a reality which Bangladesh needs to take into consideration, because it is ultimately going to affect us. It has already affected us in a big way. So we talk about sustainable development. We talk about global goal 14, which is 14.1, to prevent significantly reduced marine pollution of all kinds, in particular from land-based activities, including marine debris and nutrient pollution. Plastic debris density, again, that has become a big problem, and Bangladesh is at the forefront of this. Another big problem which Bangladesh has faced, not only with climate disaster, but also what is happening across borders. As you are well aware that in 2016, we have a large influx of forcibly displaced Myanmar nationals who have crossed the border. And of course, the Bangladesh government responded to that humanitarian disaster. It allowed the people to settle down over here for the time being. But of course, I think it is time the international community realizes, particularly both South Asian and countries which are close to the Myanmar government, that it is no longer possible for Bangladesh to sustain such a large number of people on its soil. And not only this, it has implications. A lot of these people have also become boat people. In other words, they're using the Bay of Bengal, the Andaman Sea to move into Malaysia, to move into Singapore, to move into Indonesia. So again, if you have been following the reports, particularly in Aceh, boatloads of Rohingyas time and again they have landed there. But these are the lucky ones because they've been able to reach their destination. We often hear about people who are lost, people who have been abused by pirates, for example, or by traffickers. So this is something which again the global community and South Asian community needs to take into consideration when we talk about marine security in this part of the world. So just to give you a highlight of the way Bangladesh has been dealing with humanitarian disasters, and again, I am not speaking as a Bangladeshi, but someone who is often a sort of a observer standing afar. Bangladesh has made remarkable progress when it comes to disaster management. If you look at, again, I gave you the example of the cyclone which hit the then East Pakistan in 1970 with a casualty figure of about 500,000 people, 500,000 people dead. Over the last 5 decades, even though Bangladesh has time and again experienced devastating cyclones, including the Urichur cyclone, which took place in 1985, which also led to a lot of death. But Bangladesh government and the Bangladeshi people working all together, so NGOs, various stakeholders, government, the civil service, the armed forces, for example, together we have been able to significantly cut down death rates resulting from natural disasters, particularly cyclonic storms. So again, Bangladesh can rightly take pride in what it has been able to do. And I think one of the reasons for that is whichever government is empowering Bangladesh understands that how storms can cause delegitimization of the government. Why it is politically imperative to meet natural disasters, be it food insecurity, be it natural disasters like, for example, cyclones, for example, or floods, for example, and try to mitigate the suffering of the people, because ultimately it has political implications. The Bangladesh government's track record on this has been good, but of course, as I told you, that this is always a work in progress. So just to give you an idea about how Bangladesh disaster management usually operates, you have at the National Disaster Management Council, you have the various ministries. With the monitoring cell, you have working closely with the Armed Forces Division, the three services headquarters, Coast Guard, police, formation and base headquarters, various Army units, Navy units, Air Force units. You have the subordinate, on the civil service side, you have the various ministries, you have the organization NGOs, you have the local administrations, the district collectors, for example, we don't have subdivisional officers these days, but Upajala Nirbahi officers working at the lower level. You have the Ministry of Disaster Management, which is always in charge.
Sir,
Sorry, you have the divisional.
sir, kindly manage the time, please.
Yes, I'll end in 2 minutes.
Please,
So
yes.
you have the divisional administration, and we also have the district Upajala administration. And you can see this again, working within the cities. So you have the city corporation, district disaster management, Upajala disaster management, Pৌরসভা, which is within, these are urban centers, but they have not been upgraded to city corporations. You have Union Ward Disaster Management Committee, and you have Local Disaster Management Committee, all of whom work together with the district commissioner, the ministry, Armed Forces Division, local area commander. So, and this is my last slide. So, national disaster, so we have a national policy for disaster management where understanding disaster risk, strengthening disaster risk governance to manage disaster risk, investing in disaster risk reduction for resilience, and enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. So all these are there, very good. But as, again, the first speaker pointed out, the whole issue of finance, that again becomes a big issue. Who is going to finance the cost arising out of cyclones, for example, or other natural disasters, for example, climate change? So these are the issues which we need to take into consideration. Government comes up with various policies, but often these are stymied by the fact that funds need to be made available to turn these good policies into realities. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to me, and thank you, Pathfinder Foundation, for allowing me to speak about Bangladesh and the Bay of Bengal.
Thank you, sir.
Again.
Thank you. Professor Rashidus Haman from Department of International Relations, University of Dhaka, Bangladesh. So he spoke about blue economy prospectus, especially from Bangladesh perspective, and some issues: pollution, flooding, cyclones, water scarcity as disasters. Yes, now we have done with all the panelists and main presenters. I think you might have a number of questions and comments. The floor is for you, sir.
So, Kim Harriet-Dara from the Perth US Asia Centre. My question's for Dr. Richard. I was curious, to me as a non-specialist, I'm not an environmental scientist and I certainly don't know much about finance, but it sounded like you made a really convincing case. I was just curious though whether you had met skepticism or institutional resistance to some of these schemes that you've been promoting and exploring, and what are some of the common themes that have emerged from that process? Thank you.
Yeah, good question. So there's always skepticism about like the cost of marine protection, especially scale. But what we saw was, a number of countries, for example, Kiribati in the Pacific, they reversed their protection because they saw their giant marine protected area that they stood up 10 years ago as being a real cost to, excluding them from fisheries. So really, it's there's desire, I think, from everybody, sincere desire to see marine protection happen, and protection of nature happen. Nobody wants to be the ones who are the drivers of destroying nature and destroying the planet. But what we hear, we go to places like COP and these global forums. The bankers all say, well, we need investable projects, right? And we need something to invest in. So in many ways, it's this lack of actual pipeline, and it's less about skepticism and more about the actual work of getting down to like matching, a country's development plan with investment, and then all these multilateral, bilateral, donor countries. The money and the will is often there. The capital is there in these capital markets. It's just this is a different way to think about the world's development. Because much of our development, and our prosperity as humans has come at the expense of nature. You look at all these metrics like, global health and, child mortality and education. They've all gone up everywhere. From Bangladesh to Cambodia to everywhere. There's this real emergence of the global South. But, the money is not flowing. So I think the real question is, can we do the work of creating these pathways? So I think it's less about skepticism and more just about going from just talk to action.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Dr. Richard, excellent presentation and the highlighting this importance of depths of for the nature. Since its inception as far back as 1985, a number of countries like you mentioned, Ecuador, Philippines, Barbados, Seychelles have successful use. My clarification and caution is, well, according to the IMF blog or a recent working paper, about 34 developing nations out of 60 countries who are at fiscal risk are very vulnerable to climate risk, vulnerable to climate risk. There are So Sri Lanka, like Sri Lanka, we have three major components of foreign debt. One is multilateral debt, bilateral, and the commercial debt. A significant portion of this our debt, or many developing countries, are multilateral debt. Now the debt swap for nature is largely, if I am understand correct, confined to commercial debt and the government to government debt, if I understand correct. So unless this multilateral debt institution, MDBs, banks, come up with some new generation sub, how do we go forward?
Yeah, so this is all in the details, right? You know, just like any of these transactions, it comes down to you know, what is the thing that we're really looking at restructuring. So you know, you can do bilateral restructuring. You can do just, you know, sort of sovereign restructuring, you know, on the commercial markets, and that can include multilateral debt. So it really just comes down to getting the right people in the room and the will to, you know, to come up with a solution. And you know, the models are out there. You know, this recent one in Ecuador for the Galapagos, you know, it was different because of its scale. But you know, the United States government has run a bilateral debt reduction program for many years, the Tropical Forest Conservation Act, which includes oceans, includes coral reefs, and you know, potential to restructure U.S. debt. I know many of the European countries are on a bilateral basis are open to this, and you know, I think. Like I say, there's generally this idea of goodwill and, you know, wanting to find solutions. So you know, we're only limited by our own creativity and, you know, by our own energy to do it.
Yes,
Yes, thank you, Dr. Richard. My question is also kind of related to the previous one. But I'd like to make a comment that there is a lot of concern amongst fisheries communities about access to their indigenous traditional livelihoods and fisheries areas if debt for nature swaps or blue bonds are to be the route that Sri Lanka goes down. Partly because also there is a sort of fundamental sort of response to, with regard to the financialization of Mother Nature, as it were, which is required by debt for nature swaps. And there's a lot of opacity in the way in which carbon you know, setbacks are calculated. So it becomes a sort of numbers game at some rate. So there are a lot of concerns about that. But I also just want to go back. I'm an anthropologist by training, and amongst anthropologists at any rate, there's a lot of critique about this Anthropocene climate catastrophe narrative. Yes, there is climate change, no one denies it, but the extent, the rates, where it is a hot spot, where it is a cold spot, where it may be neutral, is also debated. Sri Lanka is actually getting much more rain under the sort of climate you know, transformations that are going on. So there is a certain level of uncertainty about the climate science, which we really need to take into consideration. Now, with regard to the MPAs, the marine protection areas, the biggest marine protection area is actually in the Indian Ocean is the Chagos Islands, where the huge Diego Garcia military base is. And the elephant in the room in the discussions of climate change is, in fact, the carbon emissions of the war machine and the wars in the military business industrial complex, right? And so we really need to be also looking at what we're talking about when we're talking about marine protection areas, because there's also a growing sense that these MPAs, the protection areas, are actually about protecting undersea data cable routes, which are very important for the large countries to keep their economies and their stock markets high. So I think we really need to, you know, be a little more sort of skeptical about green and blue bonds and how they might work out, because we've also had a lot of bond scams in this country, so there's also questions with regard to how you're going to financialize nature. And finally, I would really like to say that fisheries communities in this country have been at the receiving end of hybrid warfare. There has been, the spills of the MV Pearl and the MT Diamond. Those were all affected the fisheries communities. Their harbors were locked down. And there is a sense that Sri Lanka is in the midst of a sort of hybrid economic proxy war between the big powers in the world. So I think, the debt for nature swaps are very, very complex and also will be controversial in Sri Lanka. Thank you.
I couldn't agree more. That healthy skepticism is very healthy. I would emphasize a couple things. One is the quality of these projects. We need safeguards, and those need to be built in. There's a lot of green bonds, blue bonds that are issued that actually degrade nature. So part of the way for this to work is to make sure that the money and the funding and the energy is deployed such that it helps these indigenous people, local communities that are at the forefront and the most vulnerable communities, to climate change. A lot of the marine work is not about mitigation, it's really about adaptation, right? So, thinking about mitigation of emissions and so forth from the military industrial complex is, a little beyond my remit, but that's, a comment that is, it's a fair comment. But, I think, tagging on to those sorts of efforts, it's not a bad thing. But, again, I think I would emphasize the design of our Blue Halo project in Indonesia. It was really matching the government of Indonesia's high-level ambition to build a blue and green economy with the needs of local communities. And it's not about excluding communities from fishing areas, it's about providing livelihoods and new opportunities for those same communities.
Yes, sir.
I really appreciate the comments by the lady. I think you made some very strong points. What I want to add here is, the role of science. I think MSP is going to be the most fundamental thing to move forward. But firstly, how MSP is implemented on the ground? Clearly the Western model doesn't work in this part of the world. We have to understand the local conditions better. But the second part is that how do we use MSP? If the MSP is really understood in the true sense, MSP can be a driver for ESG also, what you've been talking about. The entire governance mechanism, there can be several MSPs which can be then integrated using a lot of science and technology, and then you come up with, the hotspots from a governance perspective, like what I mentioned yesterday about people, economy, nature. See, finally, it has to be a balance between the three. It can't be either or. It has to be a balance. So, interest of the people, interest of economy, and interest of nature, they have to all be balanced. So MSP, if it is implemented in the right way, we can actually balance. We are doing a project in our center, and I would like to share that at some point. Anybody interested can look at it. But how do we use MSP in the right way? And typically the problem I have with the Western model is not blaming anybody, not being critical about anybody, but because they don't have the manpower that is required to do the work that we are talking about. So you need a lot of people involved with the right kind of expertise, and then the technology is used in the right way. And having an understanding of the tropical conditions is very important. Sri Lanka is at the heart of the tropical region. So unless we understand the local conditions, which I don't think, drivers from the West can really afford the kind of deployment that is required or the customization that is required. Your comments on this, please.
Yes. Any more questions or comments? Yes, sir.
Hello, sir. I'm Commander Prasanga from Institute of National Security Studies. My question is particularly focused on the island states. Like when we look upon the vulnerability and the adaptation of island states is concerned, so we have a large amount of coastal belt and limited amount of economy to cater, and also some of the technological difficulties and human resources. But when we consider the adaptation and the mitigation plans in the regional and global agendas is concerned, so there is a huge gap. Whether do we have equal opportunities in the regional and global forum to discuss or the emphasize on our issues? And the second thing, when emission is concerned, the island states are very minimal when considered to the developed states. And the other thing that I wanted to mention that the security perspective on the climate change adaptation and the vulnerabilities. So the coastal communities in the island states, so they are very expert on the maritime trade, maritime skills. So they may be convert or they may be jump into water to adapt the climate change on land, and they may be indulge with illicit activities. So this has to be considered in the global and regional forum and has to be give equal opportunities and seat for the island state as well as. Thank you, sir.
Shall we request Dr. Richard to answer that question? Because, no, Dr. Taula Rashid, because he is an expert on island states and the security concerns about island states. Dr. Taula.
Thank you very much for that question, and I think it's a very important question. You can't avoid that question in a forum like this, especially in a regional and or international forum where you have experts. And thank you for that question very much. Yes, I think there's a yes and no answer to this, whether or not island states are equitably represented in terms of security questions or development questions or any other globally discussed questions that we have today. In terms of climate change, island states have been in the debate, international debate since the 1980s, and I think from then onwards to today have taken a lead in terms of presenting our views as small island states and the challenges that we face. And there's been progress, and I would say some level of good development that adds up to both governance, development cooperation, multilateral aid cooperation, as well as finance. Then it comes to the level in which a small states would or could be able to share their experience to actually matter in international decision making is a debate, an ongoing debate. It depends on the forum and it depends on where. And I could give an example. I've been studying the small states engagement in UN climate security debates that started in 2007, and it's ongoing. But small states only have a narrative aspect there, just to share the experience and then see what the security community actually makes out of it. Then comes the UN forums, in more practical in terms of climate change and development. And I think small states, especially focused on Pacific Islands, have played an important role and have been playing an important role in defining what security could mean for small island states. This level of engagement has also spread out across the Indo-Pacific small states, and Indian Ocean states have been engaged bilaterally and also with the regional organizations to represent what security means for and to them. I think that's the main objective that the debates or the forums like this has to consider what it means to them. And that means what are the experiences the small states have, what are the experience of the institutions and their capacities to address these challenges. And I agree with the interlink here between the person actually working on the ocean, on the surface of the ocean, or interacting with the challenges there would have a lot to add to what actually means to have a meaningful mechanism to address their problems. So that's the kind of no part in my observation and also research on the opportunities we actually have to have meaningful contribution. where there has not yet, honestly speaking, been reflected in all policy levels that we discuss at international and also regional policy forums. So yes, it's important question that could be put into a debate like this or forum like this, and to find ways where we could have that intersubjective narrative and discussion ongoing to find practical solutions to this. Thank you.
Yes, Richard.
I'll just quickly comment. Conservation International works across multiple small island states in the Pacific, in the Caribbean, and these countries have very little access to capital markets. It's like we work closely in the state of Palau, and their GDP is only like 200 million. So a lot of it is providing access to the capital that they need to develop their blue economy. And we all depend on the oceans that collectively that these small island states or these large ocean states like that are found all over the place really hold and are shepherding for the whole world. So part of our job is to make sure that the countries have the ability to manage them well and to thrive and to prosper. So I think that's really the question at hand. It comes back to this comment earlier. It's, are the communities really going to benefit from conservation and protection, or are they going to be excluded? So we hope that it's really an inclusive process.
Yes. Are there any questions from the audience?
Yes. Thank you for the Pathfinder Foundation for this valuable program. So, according to today's presentations, we find that many plastic pollution incidences are reported all over the world, and I would like to ask Dr. Richard whether there are any sustainable solution for plastic pollution and in terms of global perspectives, and what are your views on this?
There is a huge amount of just effort around plastics and the plastic problem, from the root causes, from the places that produce most of the plastic. I think Indonesia, Philippines are some of the biggest polluters of plastic, in the world if you look at sort of the sources. And it comes down to solid waste management, and moreover this idea that we live in this throwaway society. 'Cause plastic is important. We can't just eliminate plastic. Plastic saves lives. It's cheap. It has high utility, but yet just the idea of single-use plastics that we just throw away really sets the wrong kind of mindset about how we treat the planet. So in many ways, I think that's part of the problem. And overall, just this idea of pollution is a big thing. Like if we think about blue carbon, especially seagrasses, it's about water quality. So to do a seagrass blue carbon project, you have to think about the upland, especially in places like Bangladesh, where the water quality is really driving whether or not the carbon is there and these ecosystems are sequestering for the whole planet. And the countries that are at the forefront of the problems, whether it's plastics or climate change, are not the ones who created the problem. So I think it comes back to this idea of equity, that the world should convene around the solutions that roll out in places like Sri Lanka or Bangladesh.
Yes, I think we can conclude now. The take-home message and what I understood is that we are depending on the nature. The nature is not depending on us. Right? We should allow the ocean to breathe at least. Fisheries, pollution, the war machine, the unplanned construction is always, everything is depleting or pressurizing our ocean. Therefore, we have to start at some point. So some tools are available globally: marine spatial planning, marine protected areas, blue economy, blue bonds, and nature to debt swaps are there. So we have to start at some point. On the other hand, fishers, they are not innocent at all, right? They fish all over the places in water, where the water is existing. Because we do everything for them, not for us. So therefore, there should be a starting point. Therefore, we had to think globally. So we saw the global picture, but we had to act locally. So to act locally, the tools are available. I think that's a message we got from today, because at the end, we are not again depending. Nature is not depending on us. We are depending on the nature, and we have to give something back to the nature. Otherwise, we will make a way that will lead to a disaster of the whole mankind at the end. Therefore, think of that, and let's do something locally, but think globally. So with that, I stop this session for the day, for the tea break, and after that, maybe we can take 15 minutes for the tea break, and we can convene again at 12:15. Back to the forum. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Excellent.
I will say we are on the same page.
Yeah.
So actually, I'm supporting government to develop this marine spatial planning. Right.
Yeah.
And
No,
I-
Belize, yeah,
Belize,
no, I was
Belize,
involved in that a little bit.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we got some expert from Seychelles.
Yeah.
Yes.
Could you kindly take your seats? We have come to the end of a very productive conference and are now in the final session. I kindly invite Ambassador Bernard Gunathilaka, Co-Chair Pathfinder Indian Ocean Security Conference and Chairman Pathfinder Foundation, to give his closing remarks. So.
Thank you very much. We had tea quite late, close to the lunch time. Another 10-15 minutes time we will be thinking of our lunch. So before going through this closing work what we have to do, I think we can devote about 5-10 minutes provided there are participants who are interested in taking part, to see whether they have any comments to make with regard to the and whether we have also recommendations. This is a once in 2 year activity Pathfinder Foundation is carrying. So we can also ask whether they have any specific areas to suggest or recommend, how we can focus on, what themes we can focus during our next session. So the current session, phase 3 of the Indian Ocean Security Conference, we focused on Indo-Pacific strategy and its implications on the Indian Ocean community. That was the first subject we discussed. Second subject related to underwater domain awareness, security and economic dimensions. We had a very interesting presentation yesterday on that subject. Normally we focus on the surface of the water, the oceans, and a whole heap of things beneath the water level, about which we have not much understanding. And I think the second session what we had provided an opportunity for us to focus on that subject. And this morning session, we discussed climate change, maritime disaster management, and blue-green economy. So those were the 3 subjects what we discussed during the phase 3. Now the question is, from our own experience, do we have anything to contribute with regard to the subjects or themes that we can take up for future, having given consideration to the 3 subjects that we discussed during the current session. So if there are any comments to be made, views to be expressed, we would like to hear. Thereafter we can go to the closing ceremony or closing activities of the current session. So floor is open. Yes, Ravinath.
Thank you, sir, for a very interesting 1.5 days, and I think it gave the various dimensions. I wish today's session was really broken up as 2 sessions, one to deal with the climate issues and then the disaster, because I think given Sri Lanka's experience, we might have had a lot to say. But my main point I think I want to make, and I make this having been a seminarian for a long time, is that, and Pathfinder has done this very well, that the discussion kind of in a track two sense, we need the totality of the domain we are in, whether it's countries, whether it's expertise, and I think maybe we could work a little more at that. And Sri Lanka, not everywhere they do that, but in Sri Lanka we can. And I think that the outcomes would be even more robust and verifiable if all those perspectives are there. I think it's one thing to have country positions, but I think it will be interesting to have more kind of people who are academics and think tank perspectives on some of these issues, because otherwise we won't end up kind of getting close to our takeaways will be closer to government talking points otherwise. So I think if track 2 processes are to serve that element, and many of us do reflect government thinking, after all, we've served in government, we've served in various capacities outside government, so we bring those to the table. But I think this is an opportunity to have a good brainstorming based on a sense of objectivity. So that's one thing I suggest, sir, and I think Sri Lanka is a place where that discussion was very good and fertile. And if we don't have that space, what gradually is happening is that we are talking about issues which in silos, so to say. So I think that's the big point I'm making in terms of not just on the Indian Ocean Security Conference, but even in a broader sense that parties concerned be at the table and debate it beyond their country concern necessarily.
Thank you very much for that observation. And may I ask, yes, please, ma'am, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to echo Ravinath's thanks for this conference, and it's been very interesting and illuminating. I would just like to put on the table, as an academic and a social scientist, the need for a more human security framing of security dialogues in general, and that comes again back to Ravinath's suggestion that you have a track 3 and perhaps even track 2 and track 3 conversation included in these discussions, and in that regard also the need for greater inclusivity. So I like to echo yesterday's comments of the US ambassador, who suggested that more women should be participating actively in these invited to participate in these discussions. And finally, it seems to me that there's a need to balance development with the climate narrative. Because we are being told about this climate disaster, the Anthropocene it's called, and on the other hand, everything, even development, needs to be subjected to this. And I think, particularly for global South countries that are developing countries, we really need to take a little distance from the climate narrative, because a lot of the science is, as I said, unsettled in any case, and try to balance the demands of protecting nature with also the need for development in the global South. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Actually, we should have had, I would have brought this up at an in-house conference in Pathfinder, but now since Professor Tony Pradeep is here, he was one time General Manager at the Marine Environment Pollution Authority, and also Chairman Rakava is here. I thought of bringing it out now. We just had a brief discussion on this. I happened to be an ex officio director of MIPA at the time the Express Pearl disaster took place. And it exposed a huge lacuna in terms of how we dealt with it. For days, there was indecision and inaction into basic areas like, for example, visiting the disaster management site. There was disagreement between the Navy and MIPA on one hand and the other agencies involved in the other. Secondly, there was a total lack of knowledge on how we should have dealt with this terrible disaster that took place just off the shores of Sri Lanka for a variety of reasons. Ignorance was key. Thirdly, there is, I believe, I don't know how far I am outdated here, up to now, no regional response team to help countries. Most of us are around this area in the Indian Ocean, belong to the developing world, or aspirants to higher status, but there is no emergency rapid response team. So with regard to this Express Pearl incident, took a number of days before an Indian ship arrived in our waters and helped us to douse the fire. So perhaps we should be focusing at the next segment, at the next phase 4, having a specialized segment to create awareness on this issue, and also with a view to developing a regional mechanism to deal with these issues as they come. Given the rapid rise in the volume of ships that passing our shores, I think that is very, very imperative.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Das.
Just adding to what Ambassador Jawad mentioned, search and rescue is an issue, but many people don't understand there is also something called search and recovery. Search and rescue won't last more than 24 hours. You can't expect a human survivor to last more than that. Maximum, say, 1.5 days. But what is more important is how do we recover what has gone down, because if you have to really do a complete inquiry and an analysis of what things have happened, how to recover. Many Coast Guards are not even equipped for that. They have no understanding. Coast Guards in this region, if I understand correctly, have no underwater capabilities. And without underwater capabilities, how do you recover something? And they expect that the Navy will come and do this. Navy is not equipped for doing underwater recovery. So I think this is an important area, and we have had incidents of the Indonesian submarine going down and whatever. I mean, at least, for the families also, if the body is recovered, there is a closure to the loss. So this is an important area which needs to be discussed. And even you mentioned organizational structure. If the organizational structure is clearly defined, then you know exactly what is to be done and who's to go and do things. Otherwise, we just because the Navy has the capability to be at sea, Navy gets called for everything. But navies are not equipped for this. Even piracy is a very clear example where they are not equipped for piracy. They just go there. I mean, So these are issues definitely, and I think if you can have a session on underwater search and recovery, that would be very interesting, because this will be, as many of us are getting conscious and going into various maritime activities, this will become a very important area. And otherwise, it's just a rhetoric sense, nothing happens. And when there's a disaster, or there's an event, we grapple in a very different way. Thank you.
Thank you.
But I must appreciate the way the whole 1.5 days was curated was done extremely professionally. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, actually, I talk about today's session, and we learned a lot about the current situation, but we had to think about how we move out from this situation. So for that, I think the government has taken some steps. For example, the blue economic concepts and marine spatial planning, blue bonds, and again debt for nature swaps. So those are tools we are using at the moment. But when I work in this arena with the government, I learned that the knowledge about these tools are very much lacking in our system. Therefore, I really prefer if we can arrange some workshop or a meeting with relevant stakeholders, because some are missing in this forum. So we can facilitate that program and these programs, because more we take our time, more we are going back in the economic sense. Therefore, I really like or propose Pathfinder Foundation to arrange some sort of workshop or any sort of meetings like this, especially focusing on international tools we can use in Sri Lanka to come out with from this situation. Therefore, I hope you will take it positively, and that will not only aware the stakeholders, but process at the moment we are half in the way, and that will ultimately support government to come out from this the current situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Yes, over there.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to bring it to your attention that one subject that you may want to focus on your next episode to be the BBNJ, Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction. BBNJ is being discussed, countries are studying the draft, so you might as well take all the stakeholders and the regional stakeholders into a forum and discuss about it, because it have repercussions going beyond the fishing to social issues, scientific, and at the same time, ultimately everything is going to end up with the security concern. So you may want to study on that one also, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other contributions?
Wonderful opportunity. First of all, I would like to commend this session on underwater awareness. Domain awareness is a very first time I had in Sri Lankan, very valuable point on the discussion table. So I have been a military research officer in last 2 years in the maritime security sector. Region is concerned that we don't have security architecture. So when it comes to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, it covers very rhythmic pattern, but in the Indian Ocean, we don't have specific security architecture. So we are facing in future lot of challenges that may be, you can see that the submarine proliferation is significant, and there are certain pocket of teams and grouping of geopolitical arenas. So the thing sir highlighted that we need to have, there are non-traditional and traditional security issues. So non-traditional security issues are significant, and also there are certain traditional issues that we need to address. In future, we need to ensure that the raw materials throughout these regions are passing safely. For that, we need to collaborate into a security architect that has to be established regionally and widely accepted by the globally. I think that title has to be discussed in future.
I presume that's all. No further comments to be made. Thank you very much indeed for the comments made with regard to the subjects or themes what we have covered today, as well as what could be done in the future sessions of the Pathfinder Indian Ocean Security Conferences. Dear participants, friends, with this we are coming to the conclusion or the concluding session of the current phase, third phase of the conference. As I mentioned earlier, we covered 3 broad areas: Indo-Pacific strategy, underwater domain awareness, and climate change, maritime disaster management, and blue-green economy. That third one was a fairly wide subject. There was a suggestion that we could have. The selection of these topics or themes, they were not actually randomly selected by the Pathfinder Foundation, consisting of 10 countries. Before organizing a session or a phase, we have a round of consultation with regard to the subjects we should select, and also who should take part as main presenters. There was a comment, of course, yesterday and today with regard to the participation of the female presenters. This year, I find that we did not have any, unfortunately, on the subjects that we have selected. But if you go back in the past last year, I remember lady was from Sri Lanka, but she was representing an entity based in the United States. So based on the recommendations what we have, we select subjects based on persons who could make contributions at a hybrid kind of a situation, because earlier when we convened these security conferences, we had to face with a situation where we had to deal with a pandemic, COVID-19, which prevented us from meeting. But of course, physical meetings covering the wide Indian Ocean community, going into 2 dozen of countries, and as well as financially. So I think we have a reasonably good arrangement where we meet physically here, but while we meet in Colombo, I think yesterday nearly 100 persons were taking part, listening to the discussions that were around the table in this room. Another important feature what we had yesterday was the participation of the President of Sri Lanka as our chief guest, despite his very busy schedule. He found time to come here, be with us for some time and share his views. And I am convinced that what he said during his inaugural presentation was very interesting. He was talking about moving from west to east, a phenomenon which we have observed in the recent past.